Hello everyone, today I'm going to share a blog post on leaps of faith. It first appeared on Thomas Drago's site. This recording will be used on other platforms, so you may be seeing, some people listening may be seeing this later on somewhere else. I've started doing the recordings on Periscope so that they're live. Occasionally we'll get some chat, but then they will be transferred over into the other formats that we need them on. Today we're going to be looking at a blog post on leaps of faith. It was by me, but originally appeared on Thomas Drago's site. I'm going to talk a little bit about his work, and then I'm also going to talk about a podcast by a couple other folks that just started that I think is good, that people may enjoy jumping in on here early on. So again, the guest post will be Leaps of Faith, a guest post by me on Thomas Drago's site. All right, let's look at a few people's work first, though. Thomas Drago is the author of Crow Creek. Not cover up the title there. It's getting a good bit of attention coming up here recently, and I think for good reason. I'm a fan of Southern Gothic type writing in the broad sense, you know, the older stuff that is out there, but then also kind of new takes on that idea. I think the South and small towns in general have a great well of darkness that can be applied in beautiful ways, and then, you know, in very frightening ways towards, you know, what we would consider horror. I like this book in particular. It touches on religion. It touches on some of the more cerebral ideas of monsters and the Southern Gothic that I particularly like. Some people agreeing that the South has some darkness to it firsthand. So I do like this particular book. I think anyone that picks it up will enjoy it, and I think he has a good career ahead of him. I think he's a very particular writer in how he approaches his subject, and I think this book's a good representation. I hope more people pick up on it and get to see what his potential is, and I hope he realizes his potential and keeps pushing on there. So Thomas Drago's Crow Creek, if you want to just kind of a good, you know, Southern Gothic novel that really goes into some of the intricacies of the South. He knows what he's talking about, and I like what he did here. So I appreciate that sort of thing. One more thing I wanted to look at. A podcast that just started recently that I like, Hypergraphia. The two authors that are involved with this are Jack Wallen and Jessica Mchugh. They are both very good authors that anything you pick up by them would be good. But they just started this podcast that they do together. One episode, I believe, is up, and a new one is coming here soon. But this would be a good one if you just like, you know, the idea of stories and reading and art and that sort of thing. The discussion is just very interesting. They both have interesting minds, and I think together the conversation becomes something special. So I like this podcast. I think other people would too, and it just started, so you can pick up and kind of go with them as they do episode by episode. I know some people like to come in on the beginning of something, and this would be a good one to do that. All right, so again, we're going to be reading a blog post on leaps of faith, and you know, if there's any discussion afterwards, we'll include that. But wanted to share these ideas that I wrote. All right, Leaps of Faith. My teaching certificate expired on June 30th of this year. I taught for 16 years before quitting to take care of my younger son's health needs, but also to pursue a dream of being a full-time writer. There was a stretch of doubtful days there, both with the medical care of my son and the notion of making a living at writing. There were some dark days. Eventually, he grew better, and I started expanding my income with my own fiction with ghostwriting. Both sources of income were slow builds. There was more than once that I considered packing it up and going back to teaching. I believe teaching is a noble profession, but I also believe I'm done with it. Each time I stuck it out with doing what people say is not possible, we made it a little bit further. I was surrounded by people who doubted I could pull it off and expressed their doubts in ways that would pull down my spirit. I had to fight through that and keep my skin too thick, too tough to let that talk in. All important decisions require a leap of faith. You usually can't see where you're going to land. You just kind of trust that you are going to land one way or the other. Others won't make that same leap because they can't see the landing spot, and if it is too far down, you could die. They'll resent you for jumping when they would not. Some of the people who celebrate the successful landing resent the fact that you survived the fall, but just don't want to be the person that expresses such a thing out loud. Leaps of faith almost always come before the other side of the jump is ready and secure. You could wait a few more months or a few more years until the other option is ready. You can wait until the construction of the other life has been completed and the inspections are done and it looks secure. That is what a responsible person does. The problem is that when you are going for something beyond what most people think is possible, the other side of the leap is never finished before the jump time. There will be other opportunities and you can wait, but often the wait becomes the life. You can resent yourself for not jumping and resent those that jumped anyway. The risk is never going to be gone, and often the secure life can fall apart like it wasn't supposed to do while you are waiting for the risk on the other side of the intended leap to mitigate itself. I always caveat these discussions of writing full-time by saying there is nothing wrong with keeping a day job and writing in your spare moments. There is nothing cowardly in that choice. I'm not telling people to quit their jobs. I'm also not telling you that you can't. If you resent people who have leapt, or resent yourself for not leaping, the healthy choice is either to leap or to find peace in the choice you are making. Look at it as a choice instead of a trap. Believe you are strong enough to face the day, whether it is conquering the monsters you already know all too well because you are stronger than them, or whether it is leaping to conquer the unknown. You can fight either battle, but never think that you are trapped. The worst that can happen with either choice is that you fail miserably and you have to start over. People do it all the time. My biggest fear used to be losing my job. I hated getting up in the morning and I feared losing the job at the same time. So many of us fight and pray to keep jobs and lives that we hate. When they do fall apart, we land somewhere eventually. Sometimes it is a painful journey to the landing, but we often look back where we were standing and are so thankful to not be there anymore. One thing you can be pretty sure of in your life: one day you will either leap or you will fall from where you are standing at this moment, and you will land somewhere. It is great to look back once the journey is over and to be less afraid of that drop than you were before. I think oftentimes leaps of faith are discussed in terms of religion, and this can be a religious topic, I think. If you believe in God, almost every choice that you make as a believer involves some sort of jump. There's some point where you make that choice before the other side is available. But I think this is also true even if you don't consider yourself a spiritual person. We like to think of ourselves as reasonable, scientific, but I think even in the sciences, and I used to teach science, I think even there are times where you're looking at two different paths and you're using the data to make a choice, but at some point you're trusting yourself that I'm going to explore this line of thought and it might fall apart, but I'm going to go ahead anyway, and if it does fall apart I can move on to something else. I started talking about this more because some successful authors had started giving the advice that you wait until you have a bestseller, or you wait until things are, you have something on the charts before you quit your job. And I just think that's really bad advice. Telling someone to quit their job and write about zombies is probably bad advice too. But this notion that you wait until you're successful and then you make the jump is almost never how life works. I kind of made the leap because we were pushed into it. Because of some health stuff. We had to have one of us stay home anyway. I didn't really like my job anymore, so I made the choice. But there was no justifiable success to say, oh yes, I should quit this and become a writer. You kind of leapt, burned the bridge behind, and you kind of kept going. Letting my teaching certificate lapse, even though I've already kind of committed to this life and was working into it, is kind of one of those bridge burning moments, where I'm like, I'm leaving that life behind. I could have taken a couple classes, I could have kept the certificate, but it kind of feels like a choice to say I'm in this 100%. I'm not leaving escape routes behind me. Um, I actually a while back got called back to a career day at the school where I used to teach, and was talking about being a writer. And again, I didn't give the kids advice, don't go to college, just stay home and write about zombies. That wasn't what I said. But what I did tell them was that, um, life, a lot of life is doing what you have to do. No matter what life you choose, there's things that have to be done. Taking care of your family, taking care of yourself. Put into a position where you have to earn money to pay your rent and all those things. No matter what life you choose, there's a lot of have-tos involved. Um, but sometimes, every once in a while, there's a moment where you can take a gamble on yourself. That you don't have to follow every crazy idea that comes into your head, but there are times where you can, where you can take a risk on yourself. You can take a gamble on your dream. And when those moments do present themselves, every once in a while, take a gamble on yourself. Every once in a while, make that leap. And again, the worst that could happen is that it fails. That's the absolute worst that can go on. And you might have to go back to a life that you had before. You might have to move on to some other life. I appreciate it, man. Thanks for jumping in, Chris. You might have to you might have to, go on to some other life, when it does come apart, but it might work, and there might be a chance. And there's very few moments where you look back and say, man, I really regret taking a chance on myself. It didn't work out, and I should have just stayed with the day job or whatever it was that I had before. But there's a lot of times where people regret, I should have jumped. I should have taken the leap and just found out what would have happened. I may have still failed anyway, but what an interesting choice that would have been to just give it a shot. So again, I encourage people when they feel that level of courage, that level of fear, to consider it, consider the leap, because there is a life, beyond the jump, and it may be what you were always meant to do. It may be what you were designed to do, and if you're a person of faith, it may be what God created you for. However you want to look at that. But again, that's kind of the discussion on leaps of faith. I appreciate everybody who listened in, and thanks for joining in. And I'll keep working at being a writer. And like I said, you land somewhere, and that's kind of where I've landed. So thank you very much.